One of the practical things that I think about a lot is who is our audience. Um, and who our audience is drives how we curate the physical space and how we represent ourselves on digital platforms. So we find it necessary to be on platforms like Artsy because in the Bahamas, we have 300,000, 400,000 people, I think, and maybe like 100,000 of them live in New Providence, and it's a very small, minute percentage of that that actually would come into TERN. So how do we allow our artists to have maximum reach? And that's through um, keeping our website updated and having that as an archive. Um, Participating in online fairs that RT would put on and so on.
Hello everyone, welcome to Parallel Perspectives, brought to you by the Program of African Studies at Northwestern University. I am Uche Okpa-Iroha, your host, and co-hosting with me is Benita Nnachortam.
Hello.
On this program, we meet with artists, curators, and academics to get different perspectives on current developments in the arts, culture, contemporary practice, and the humanities.
Together, we will discuss various topics in these fields and explore how they reinforce or challenge our worldviews, impact our lives and society, while also looking at how they inspire our expression, influence our perception, and ultimately our future.
Building on the foundation of our inaugural season, this second series will investigate the field of curation, which is on the cusp of intersectionality. Curation or curating is a critical aspect of cultural preservation, interpretation, and education. And we have invited professionals in the field to discuss the theme Curation Across Borders, African and African Diaspora Cultural Shift and Developments.
Thank you for joining us again on this program. We have an entire series from season 1, so if you haven't seen that before, do check it out or listen. And don't forget to like or share or comment on this video because your feedback helps us make these programs more insightful.
In this episode, we speak with Jodi Minnis, an artist and curator who is based in Nassau, the Bahamas.
She shares with us about her curatorial practice, challenges, and optimistic views. She also lets us know how it's connected to both the Bahamas and the global audience. Welcome to this episode of Parallel Perspectives. We're happy to have you here with us again, Jodi Minnis. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm really, really good. Great to see you both again. Thanks for having me.
To start with, Jodi, let's look at the social impacts of curation, touching on the themes of identity, representation, visual culture, and the diaspora. I want to know, in your experience, how do curatorial projects contribute to our understanding of identity and belonging, particularly within the Bahamian community?
So I think that you asked how my projects then aid to that, the projects that I'm curating at TERN. I'll start by saying TERN, at its inception, is founded specifically to amplify the voices of Caribbean artists. So in our seek to amplify those voices, we opened the floor for different persons within the region to tell us their stories. So before we even started getting in the depths of our curatorial program, we launched into so many studio visits and just so many different conversations with artists, not just from the English speaking Caribbean, but from the French speaking Caribbean, the Dutch Caribbean as well, just to understand more about their practices. So there's a lot more. I think you could kind of garner a sense of identity through reading, through like following people on social media, researching their work, but it's one thing to hear them define themselves and to hear how they want their work to be represented, how they see the impact of their work. All of the things that we do at TERN is just to give space and platform for persons who have self-identified to continue to persist in what that identity is. I see us amplifying the voices of the artists that we work with rather than TERN having a singular voice. So the thing that we would be shouting from the mountaintop is that we are a Caribbean art gallery, but in the terms of identity, visual culture, and so on, we follow the artist's charge in that regard.
Thank you. In your work as a curator, you've had experiences working in traditional spaces for exhibitions, and you've also had experience working in non-traditional spaces like the digital platforms. And in both cases, what are the challenges that you may have experienced, and how have you navigated these challenges for each peculiar situation? So, how have you navigated these challenges for each peculiar situation?
That's a good question. One of the practical things that I think about a lot is who is our audience, um, and who our audience is drives how we curate the physical space and how we represent ourselves on digital platforms. So we find it necessary to be on platforms like Artsy because in the Bahamas, we have 300,000, 400,000 people, I think, and maybe like 100,000 of them live in New Providence, and it's a very small, minute percentage of that actually would come into TERN. So, how do we allow our artists to have maximum reach? And that's through um, keeping our website updated and having that as an archive. Um, Participating in online fairs that RT would put on and so on. Also ensuring that we work with PR companies every time we get engagements with press, like actually engaging them and doing our best to represent ourselves well when we go to physically in fairs and so on. So I would say that one of the practical things to do is just to make sure, or what we try to do is to make sure that everything that is present physically in the gallery also exists digitally somewhere, because our primary audience is not solely within the Bahamas. One of the challenges we face, and what I find a lot of other galleries are now facing, specifically galleries that are not within like art hubs like New York or Miami or wherever, is shipping is quite a quite a conundrum. So that's where having digital platforms or having a presence digitally helps. So I may not have the work physically in the gallery, but if I post it on Instagram, I may get an inquiry through that. And maybe we could, set up studio visits in that kind of way. It's also trying to be sensitive to costs. So I think that's something that we don't like to talk money in art, but sometimes it's actually more cost effective to leave things at leave things within in Nassau rather than taking them out. So also it's a not great thing to say, but when we consider things like Expo Chicago or Untitled Art Fair that we've been to, the kind of work that we take is actually determined by what can travel easily, and that's just some decisions that we have to make. So we may have a more robust presence curatorially in an online art fair, but a more stripped down, maybe 1 to 2 person, max 3 person exhibition at art fairs, because it just makes logistical sense. So yeah.
Let's briefly highlight personal anecdotes and tease out how they illustrate and shape the educational impact of curation in spaces where you have curated projects. In essence, can you share any transformative experience you have had through your curatorial work that highlighted the educational role of art in your space and in your country?
Yeah, so I about 10 years ago now, I curated an exhibition called From Columbus to Junkanoo at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, along with another curator named Avery Wright, and we produced a catalog for that exhibition. And I'm seeing now how 10 years later, that catalog is still in circulation. I still have people like buying it. I'm now thinking about a part two, but that shifted how I thought about the documentation of exhibitions, because schools that would not have been able to, because we exist in an archipelago, right? So persons who live in the southern islands or the northern islands probably wouldn't have seen the exhibition, but their teachers were able to have the catalogs to teach um, students Bahamian history through art, and that's been quite transformative for me, and it opened my eyes to curating selecting art to put in a space, whether that space is digital or physical. Sometimes I think that we, in the Bahamas now, in this contemporary sense of curating, we've lost a lot of scholarship. We've lost a lot of research. So there's not a lot of people researching. The curatorial work is not birthed out of deep investigation. So I'm thinking about now how at TERN, and we've been fortunate to do that. For every solo exhibition, we've what's the word? Commissioned writing for those shows. And now I'm seeing where persons who are, living abroad, they have this like scholarship now digitally to reference. So where the NAGB's catalogs are solely physical, where you could only buy them if, you come here or you have someone ship it to you. We're actually producing scholarship for these artists. And it's 100% accessible to anybody who has internet. So I think those two things are things that I'm quite proud of. And I'm thinking now, just today I was like, how do I continue that? So
Thank you. You made a point about how there is sometimes a lack of resource, such as scholarship, to further research. Why do you think that is? And what would be your optimistic suggestion on countering that, or to counter that, rather? Yeah.
I think that there isn't any incentive much locally to do it. So most catalogs and most books where you could get your work published comes out of being attached to an exhibition. And if you're not in a space that has the funding to, do that venture, then it more than likely won't get done. Also, there's a lot of limitations in regards to grants for persons in the Bahamas. I know I could name like 2 or 3 different like grant opportunities that, Bahamians living in the Bahamas can't access just because of how we are financially represented on the world stage. So I think that, yeah, it's that. And the institutions as well, like they're either they're doing it internally or they don't see the need to continue work that's been done for years. Like when I was a young student, I was commissioned by the National Art Gallery to write for the newspaper, the local newspaper, right? And that archive has disappeared. And by disappeared, meaning the newspaper did a whole overhaul of their website, and they're slowly but surely like uploading articles back. But like 2-3 years ago, I couldn't find any of my past work. So I think that it's a lack of incentive. You also don't know how the work is going to be treated after you release it. But my beautiful scenario is that the National Art Gallery, in collaboration with our Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, like has a fellowship, like to incentivize like writers and research on Bahamian arts and culture, and not just the visual arts. Like I think we need to retroactively document Bahamian history in a government. I mean, not necessarily like a government produced way, because we know that could be.
Thank you. I really like to ask the optimistic opinion. I really like to ask for that, because there's just so many challenges that we encounter in our practice as artists or as curators. And so I think it takes imagination to kind of see beyond those issues and say, what would the future, the ideal situation look like, and how can we create it? And I think it starts from even having an idea what that situation would be like in the first place. Then maybe, resource can go in that direction. But if we're not even thinking it, it's never going to happen. So hang in there. Yeah. So how do you envision the future of curation from the Bahamas, preserving your heritage, the African heritage, or should I say the Bahamian heritage?
There's so much rich culture there.
Yeah, there's so much culture, right? Mm-hmm. How do you envision that future while also engaging the global audience? Because you've mentioned, for example, coming over to the USA to participate in art fairs like Expo Chicago. What are the other platforms that you are connecting your organization with and also representing these artists on, and in that sense preserving heritage as well?
That's a good question. Currently, I think preservation first comes through acknowledging the links between the cultures. I think something that we struggle with a bit in the Bahamas is fully accepting that we are an African people. And though we may be multicultural, the majority of the people are of Afro descent, and when we start there, then we can be more readily accepting to exploring why that culture needs to be preserved. It's not just something that happens through happen chance. This knowledge is not just flippant. It's not just like something that your Grammy told you to do and you just do. It has like real process and real knowledge and technology and science behind it. So I think we have to start there first. There's already a move between the Bahamas and Princetown in Ghana. There's connections that have been made there. One of our Junkanu leaders, her name is Angelique McKay. She's a queen mother in Princetown, specifically with the Ahara people. So this cultural exchange between the linking and finding the origins of Junkanu in Ghana is, opening the door for now. I'm having a conversation with her about I've got accepted to do a curatorial residency with a foundation in Ghana called the Lafa Foundation in Accra. And I'm now talking to her like, hey girl, how do I get over there? Like, what resources did you have? So I think the more of us that are traveling between the Bahamas and the continent, not just to Ghana, but to Nigeria and Senegal and so on, the more we could see the need for the preserving the value, because you have to then like establish value. So now that the value is being established, now that the connections are being made, we can then talk about preserving it. And preservation comes from, like I said, not just treating it as something flippant, but treating it as something that has real conceptual grounding behind it. And that can happen through, something as simple as making a book about how to make a Junkanu costume. Those are things that you have to learn in a shack. You can't just like Google and be like how to do that. You have to go and immerse yourself in that culture, but there's still a quite technical cultural aspect of it that needs to be preserved. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jodi.
Do you have any questions for us?
I wish I was a curious person, but how I think what I want to ask is, how has this podcast and having these conversations changed your outlook on arts administration and curatorial practices?
Would you like to go first?
Yeah, it's a very important question. And what we wanted to do, what we planned to do this year was to deviate from what we did in our first season, but also to push it towards education and information outside of that administrative question which you have asked. We think that informing our audience will be a key way of looking at curatorial practice, which I know a lot of administration goes into it, but what are those educational elements that add value to what we do? Baxing, the administrative work is actually very intense, as you know, which goes into planning, budgeting, fundraising, and all that stuff, which also forms the bedrock for any curatorial project, and it can be quite intense. But looking at the educational aspect, I think that's one of the key areas of what curators do. I'm also an independent curator, but it's important that through our work that we inform, that we educate, and in doing that we also find very effective ways of managing the administration, having a team of people that you work with that can also bring in value, like I know you have at the TERN, and good enough, I've met your team, and how you effectively put this projects together, looking at artists, inviting artists, developing a concept, developing a team, and then connecting it with that educational aspect where you are not just having a show, but you are engaging with the community, whether it's on the issue of identity, representation, or any other social aspects of the communities where we live in. So both these elements collide together to give structure to what we do, both administratively and educationally too.
Yeah. Thank you. If I could add to that, I was thinking of the term rabbit hole. Rabbit hole is sometimes used in like a negative way, but I like to think of rabbit holes being sometimes helpful in research. It could be bad, but it could also be good. So you are the healthy point or beginning hole that becomes a bigger rabbit hole for the curious mind about Bahamian culture, arts administration, or curatorial practice in the Bahamas. And so in contemporary times, in classrooms today, online, when someone Google searches something, I hope that you pop up. And I hope that some of the thoughts that you have shared makes one say, oh, okay, she mentioned this name. What's John Canoe? Like, I didn't know about that before. And that's a whole thing. And learning about the people you mentioned today, you mentioned the name, I forget now, but you mentioned the name of a leader or one of the prominent people that, maybe organize the festival or so in the Bahamas. That's something, like even just knowing about that person. Maybe I am a painter in 2030 and I am trying to do something around the John Canoe Festival, and that could be an inspiration, I see it as all very much connected. So you help introduce a broader subject on arts administration and curatorial practice in the Bahamas. And I think that makes this very valuable. So thank you for asking. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Jodi. Thank you so much also for joining us and being the first guest for this Parallel Perspectives second season. Thank you so much.